I think often as songwriters, we get stuck just thinking about verses, choruses, and bridges. And once in a while, we might throw in a pre-chorus or even a post-chorus. But in this video, we are going to talk about a coda versus a finale. Let's talk about the difference. So first of all, we have to answer the question, what is a coda? And if you're used to reading sheet music, maybe you were trained classically as a musician, or you just know how to read sheet music, you've probably seen the coda symbol used before. So first we have to answer the question, what is a coda? And it basically is just an independent passage introduced at the end of a song in order to help that song to come to a satisfactory close. So as you can probably tell from that very generic definition, it could actually be just a couple seconds long or several minutes long. In fact, if you are used to reading sheet music, you may have noticed before that oftentimes a coda will literally just be used to be like, hey, we know that the chorus usually ends on, say, the 4 chord, but actually for the final time that you play this chorus at the very end of the song, make sure you end on the 1 chord and then the song is over. But a coda also could be infinitely long. You could have an 8-minute song and 4 minutes of it are actually the coda, because the coda really doesn't mean anything specific about the quality of the section. It doesn't tell us whether it's a big, important section, whether it's sort of an outro, really high in energy and in volume, whether it has lyrics or not. It doesn't even imply any of those things. It's just simply the final passage at the end of your song. So it might just be an outro. That would be a coda. So overall, I think a coda is something like a refrain in that it's a term that has such a generic meaning that a lot of usages of coda, while technically being true, are not really helpful, especially as songwriters, given that usually what makes a song section's name useful to us is how to sort of think through how to utilize it. When we think of a pre-chorus, there are certain implications that come with a song section that's a pre-chorus. For example, we want a pre-chorus usually to really lead up into that chorus in a powerful way, to really help that chorus explode, but also usually we want to design the melody that may happen during the pre-chorus in order to have good voice leading so that our vocalist isn't too tired out by the chorus or by having a giant leap from the vocal range in the verse straight to the chorus. So we have a pre-chorus in the middle that sort of helps a vocalist warm into it. So there are usually implications with different song sections like choruses and verses, but a coda really doesn't have any of that. It's very, very generic. And in that way, it's kind of like a refrain, which we talked about a few videos back, where a refrain really is a super generic term that could include a chorus, would count as a refrain, but also a pre-chorus would technically count as a refrain, and a post-chorus would usually count as a refrain. But also a refrain is a repeated line, say at the end or at the beginning of each verse, that also would qualify as a refrain. So in the same way, a coda is super generic. You could just have a single chord that you end a song with that you hadn't played before, and that technically would be a coda because it's a part of the music that you just haven't played yet. Or you could have a whole 5-minute section that is the emotional peak of the song. Or if you have something simple, like maybe going back to sort of that verse riff or variation on the riff that you were playing during the verse to sort of be the musical outro to your song. You've already finished the final chorus, but you don't just end on that last chord. Instead, you just have a little bit of an outro. That also would qualify as a coda. So this brings us to, what is a finale? Well, I would say a finale is to a coda sort of what a chorus is to a refrain. It's a much more specific, opinionated song section compared to the more generic, not so meaningful song section that is a refrain or a coda. So one criteria that I think really goes into what a true finale would be is that it's the final major song section. So unlike a coda, which technically could just be 1 chord, or technically could also be something like a musical outro, that is very similar to music that has happened earlier in the piece. In the case of a finale, it's truly its own song section in a way that you actually would label it along with something like verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, finale. You don't usually label intro or outro or tags or things like that, right? We say it's verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, form, or something like that. So because it's a major song section, we would probably label it in the same way that we would label other major sections of our songs like verses and bridges and choruses. Another inherent part of a finale is that it will happen exactly one time and will not repeat. So unlike a chorus and unlike verses that at least musically repeat, like a bridge bridge, usually, a finale will happen exactly once and then be done. Another opinionated part of a finale is it will actually function as the emotional and often the story peak of the song. Normally, a part of the definition of a chorus is usually something that has to do with it being the emotional peak of a song. So almost by definition, a chorus normally is going to be that energy peak of the song, the most exciting part of the song, the biggest part of the song. But in the case of a finale would actually take over, whereas the chorus was the main highlight for the entire song. Then the finale comes along and is actually even bigger and even more grandiose and important sounding than the chorus was. And finally, a finale will also be a song section that generally actually has lyrics, unlike, say, an outro or a coda, which may or may not have lyrics. In the case of a finale, the implication, sort of going back to the whole, hey, we'd label it just like we would label verses and choruses, that's because our finale will have lyrics. Lyrics is an important part of what a finale is. When it comes to a coda, it may or may not have lyrics. But with a finale, it almost certainly will, and usually also tends to wrap up the story. Normally the story would be wrapped up maybe in the bridge before the final chorus, or maybe you'd have a bridge and then a third verse that would wrap up the story and then have the chorus wrap up the theme. But in this case, usually that finale operates as a way to really tell the last part of the story and really have the climax of the story held until the last part of the song. So overall, a coda doesn't really imply anything about the content or the quality of the part of a song that is labeled a coda. All we know about it is that's how the song closes. That's really about it. But with a finale, it's actually more opinionated and says something about the section in a way that a chorus tends to be opinionated, in that it tends to be the emotional high point of the song, and the bridge tends to be opinionated. All our other song sections that we normally would label are fairly opinionated sections, which is why we can debate whether something is, say, the second half of a verse or whether it's a true pre-chorus. The reason we can even have those debates is because there's sort of definitions and implications and jobs that each section has. So while a coda is a traditional musical concept, it's not really a song section in the way that a verse and a chorus is, but a finale is actually a song section that tends to be very opinionated. So overall, with a coda versus a finale would almost always be a part of a coda, but very often a finale wouldn't be the entire coda. So for example, if you have a huge song section that has never been played before and will never be played again after, that closes out your song and it has lyrics and it's the emotional high point of the song, but then you have a musical outro, technically that finale as well as the outro together would make up the coda. And then speaking of outros, an outro in a lot of songs would actually be a coda, and in other circumstances like the one we just mentioned, it would actually be a part of the coda. So overall, a coda certainly is a helpful tool, especially when it comes to reading and writing sheet music, but a finale is actually an opinionated song section that you can add to your songs that will help spice up your songs and really change the dynamic. One of the reasons I really love to utilize finales is because in your average song, you've already heard the emotional peak of the song by about a minute in, because you usually have a verse and then a chorus. And even if that chorus is a smaller, less energized version of the final chorus, it's the same lyrics, it's the same melody, and in general is just the same song section. So very often in songs, a minute in, somebody has already heard the highlight of the song. This is why a lot of people give a song a chance until the end of the first chorus, because at that point they've heard the highlight theoretically. So if they still don't like the song, why bother listen to the rest? Or they give it until the bridge, because the bridge in general is going to be the final new song section before it's just, okay, but now it's just repeating choruses or more verses and then a chorus and all that kind of stuff. But when we have a finale, that actually isn't true. So you're no longer getting the highlight of the song within the first minute. Instead, you're getting a highlight of the song within a first minute and then get a pleasant surprise at the end of the song where you thought you already heard the emotional highlight of the song, and then something comes along and is even bigger of an emotional highlight. So overall, in case you're wondering, hey, I've never heard of a finale before. Like, I've heard grand finale, and I at least kind of understand just implicitly by the name, like what you're going for when you say finale, but I feel like I've never seen that song section before. The reason for that is because I'm pretty sure that I made it up. but it is something that I utilize a lot and I think has been really helpful for creating different sort of song architectures where it's not just the same old verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, and we're adding something new to the table. Because if you think about it, we're constantly sort of inventing new types of song structures or new type of song sections, right? Like a pre-chorus isn't something that always existed. Even a true traditional chorus is not something that always existed. These have emerged over time. Or post-choruses. Post-choruses have really become popular, especially in the context of pop music. But just in general, post-choruses have become really quite popular over the last 10, 15, 20 years. So why can't we invent our own song sections that are opinionated and have a certain job within the context of the song to really start to try other different ways of telling stories through music that still involve some of the core important principles, such as, for example, almost every song you want to have some form of repetition. That is a very important part of song structure and general music structure is some form of repetition. So we don't want to move away from that, but within those parameters, which are very vague, we can do so many different things. So why can't we have a finale that is almost like a bridge, but instead of bridging back to the chorus, it actually is a song section that's even bigger than the chorus and happens at the end of the song, and then the song ends. Which a great part of that is oftentimes if the chorus is the highlight and you hear the chorus 4 times, by the time the song is over, the listener's probably like, yeah, okay, I'm ready for the song to be over. But if you give them the best part of the song at the very end and then the song ends, that kind of leaves them with the, oh, that was awesome. And I only heard the best part of that song once. Kind of want to listen to it again. It's kind of like how movies like The Prestige leave you at the end where you're like, my mind is blown by that ending. And now I kind of want to turn it back on again. Like, rewatch the whole thing. Even though I just spent 2.5 hours watching it the first time, it's so good and my mind's so blown, I feel like I need to watch it again. You want to give your listeners the same effect, or sometimes you might want to give your listeners the same effect. So, for that reason, you should absolutely try utilizing a finale. So hopefully you found this helpful. If you did, something else you'll likely find helpful is my 10 different ways to start writing a song free guide. It gives you 5 ways from a lyrical standpoint and 5 from a musical standpoint. So whether you prefer to sort of start with themes and lyrics first or with music first, there's 5 different ways for you. And whichever one you prefer, honestly, you should try both because sometimes mixing it up is something that can help keep us creatively invigorated and not get creatively dry. Because that's kind of the worst part of songwriting sometimes is if we get in a rut where we're like, man, I just can't come up with anything that sounds different and interesting. And it feels like all my songs are starting to sound the same, except these are really bad copies of my previous songs. Or I keep going to the same chord progressions over and over again, or whatever it might be. The reason that happens is often we start our songs from the same standpoint every time. Maybe for you, it's grabbing your acoustic guitar and coming up with a chord progression. That's a fine way to start a song. But if you just decide to, say, use your acoustic guitar and come up with a bass line first, or if you decide to use your guitar and solo to figure out a melody first, or maybe a guitar hook first, or you just sing in the shower and write your vocal melody first, no matter what you're doing, just changing it up can be something to reinvigorate you creatively and really help you to not write songs that all sound the same. So just as simple as switching instruments or switching what part you write first can go a long way in the songwriting process. So be sure to grab that guide. Thank you for watching. I appreciate every single one of you. I'll talk to you in the next one.